This series is supported by Horizon Therapeutics and is a collaboration with National Kidney Foundation. And our first presenter today is Elena Zidaru. She is a registered dietitian that's been working with us for over 10 years. She provides individualized nutrition therapy for people with various medical conditions such as cancer, diabetes, and of course, chronic kidney disease. Joining her briefly after her presentation would be her dietetic intern, Arianna. And our final speaker for today, our special guest, is Chef Duane Sunwald, culinary arts instructor at the Inland Northwest Culinary Academy at Spokane Community College. He's published dozens of journal articles and given numerous talks on nutritionally focused diets. And sorry, this is his picture. I'm a little slow on my clicking. I apologize. And I'd like to stop my share screen now and pass it on to Elena.
Yay, we made it to the last class. That should be kind of the most exciting, just because we're going to talk a lot about meal planning and nutrition tips. We have the cooking demonstration at the end. Also, Arianna Agajanians, she's my dietetic intern, and if you can wave, Arianna, so people can see you. She's going to share some slides that she put together for future diet trends with CKD and diets that, you know, maybe you're going to read online, or we have some information how they can be used for CKD, and just kind of pros and cons around those dietary patterns. The class outline very quickly. So we're going to have the recommended diet patterns for CKD. What's currently recommended to be healthy diet for CKD, kind of throughout stages, you know, from 1 to 5. We're going to go more in detail about reading the nutrition label. We're going to visit some portion sizes, tips, and definitely some meal planning tips. And nutrition tips, how to implement healthy eating behaviors so you could actually manage your CKD better through diet. And then we, at the end, as I said, Arianna will talk about future diet trends. Then, so that's going to be about a full hour. And then the last half an hour would be Chef Duane with this cooking demonstration that he put together. So stay tuned. So talking about the recommended diet patterns for CKD. So depending on, and we talk with CKD, there's a lot of, you know, people can have diabetes, can have high blood pressure. CKD patients are higher risk for heart disease. So the dietary patterns recommended are heart healthy diet, DASH diet, which the acronym for DASH is Dietary Approaches to Stop Hypertension. And it's basically an eating plan that's been shown with research that can lower blood pressure very effectively. Then Mediterranean diet patterns, which probably you heard about as it's kind of very similar with the heart healthy diet pattern. Then we have a diabetes-friendly diet that's more carbohydrate control. And for people with diabetes, that would be an important dietary measure to take. And then plant-based diets that can be different ones, you know, can be using MyPlate model of eating. It can be vegan, you can be vegetarian or pescatarian. So it's a bigger kind of umbrella. So there are different variations, but they're all considered dietary, healthy dietary patterns for people with CKD. And we're going to actually discuss those more in detail and look at differences, because I can tell you, I will go back a little bit, and I can tell you, just looking at those diets, a lot of like what they all have in common is that the core elements of all these diets are plant-based foods. You know, the way you see under Mediterranean diet, they focus on fruits, vegetables, whole grain, you know, legumes, nuts, and seeds, and includes the lean meats. So all of those dietary patterns actually have in common those plant-based foods. Moving along, I'm going to start with the DASH diet. Again, dietary approaches to stop hypertension, and has been recommended for by the National Kidney Foundation as a way to control better high blood pressure and slow down the progression of CKD. It focuses on lowering sodium, but at the same time, you lower the sodium and you increase the intake of vegetables and fruits, whole grains, and also in terms of protein choices, you focus on lean meats. And I have a slide here that will give you a little bit more specific recommendations of how to achieve that. So basically, for grains, something between 7-8 daily servings. Again, depending, I have to say, I do a modified version of that. If somebody needs to lose weight, it's a smaller frame, you know, it can be as low, if they're not very active, it can be as low as maybe 4 servings of grains in a day, just kind of more limited. But somebody that's bigger frame, very active, with no diabetes, you know, they could actually use 7 up to 7-8 servings a day of grains, but those also would be at least half of them should be whole grains, so more complex, high fiber type of grains and carbohydrates. And you know, I want to mention a serving of a grain, it's about maybe 1/3 of a cup for cooked grain, if it's rice or pasta, a slice of bread. So the servings usually are small. So in a full cup of cooked grain, regardless if it's oatmeal or rice, brown rice or white rice, a full cup would be basically 3 servings already. So I wanted to mention that because I know sometimes people feel like, oh, that many grains on a healthy diet. But again, the servings are pretty small overall. And then we have for vegetables, 4 or 5 servings daily. Fruits, again, 4 or 5. Low fat, fat-free dairy products, 2 to 3 daily servings. Meat, poultry, and fish, 2 or less daily servings. So it can be a deck of cards, which is usually about 3 ounces. As we mentioned last week, the size and the thickness of a deck of cards, it's about 3 ounces. And it can be 1 deck of cards or 2, so kind of 2 or less, basically, depending again of your stage, how much you need to limit protein, your body weight, how much of a budget of protein you have. Remember, I said last week that the recommendations of protein are based on kilogram body weight. So the heavier you are, the more room and more budget of grams of protein you have. If you're a smaller frame, you have less room. So you might be okay with just 1 deck of cards a day of meat, poultry, or fish. Then nuts, seeds, and dry beans, so legumes, those can be 4 or 5 servings a week. So encourage people to eat more of that. From the Mediterranean diet study that showed decreased risk of stroke by 30% when people were eating those healthy fats from olive oil and nuts. The consumption was just 1/4 of a cup a day for 4 to 5 days a week. So not necessarily every day, but most days in a week kind of showed that benefit. And again, the serving was pretty small, just a handful of nuts, basically. Fats and oils, 2 to 3 servings daily, and sweets, trying to limit to less than 5 servings a week, which again, the servings for sweets are usually pretty small too. So don't imagine that's necessarily a generous slice of pie or cake. Kind of moving forward, I want to go into the Mediterranean diet and show you this pyramid. It's a nice visual that basically shows at the bottom of the pyramid. So again, the majority of foods that are part of this dietary pattern would be plant-based foods, fruits, vegetables, legumes, nuts and seeds, whole grains. Olive oil and avocados as healthy fats are part, and nuts and seeds are part of this group too, even though they're not necessarily fruits and vegetables. Then fish and seafood, at least 2 times a week. We say up to 12 ounces of fish a week would be a good amount to aim for. And then poultry, eggs, cheese, and yogurt, moderate portions. I would choose low-fat, non-fat options, maybe remove the skin of the poultry. And then at the top of the pyramid, we have the red meats and the sweets, less often. Wine in moderation, if drinking no more than a glass. Not necessarily needs to be a a must, but it can be incorporated as part of this diet. And then drinking water. I like my Mediterranean diet kind of puts at the bottom of the pyramid, socializing, sharing meals with, family, friends, exercising. So that's kind of part of a healthy lifestyle. And again, what you notice that's in common with the DASH diet, when you look at the top servings, how many servings of those plant-based foods, Mediterranean diet has about the same, quite a bit of those foods. Then the diabetes, MyPlate recommendation. So if it's carb control, if it's plant-based, it doesn't have to be necessary, as I said, vegan, vegetarian, or pescatarian, but if it kind of falls into that category of plant-based or carbohydrate controlled, MyPlate model of eating, it's a good example of how to use this dietary pattern successfully. I want to emphasize that, half of the plate, it's non-starchy vegetables, can be a combination of cooked, raw, so a salad and cooked vegetable together, can be only cooked, can be only raw. Here, the same example, some it's cooked, some it's raw. And then the other half of the plate to be split in half in between your high fiber carbohydrate, like this brown rice here, and then the deck of cards for a lean protein, photo of a plate the size of a deck of cards. And you have some variations. In this particular case, I mean, when you look at this, the 3/4 of a plate between the vegetable and the starch would still be plant-based. And here the same between mashed potato and the vegetable is still plant-based. And, this is a modified, I mean, some people, this is definitely lower calorie. This is red meat, but lean red meat. This is mashed potato, so may have some added fat to it compared with the brown rice that's steamed. So it's a little bit more caloric dense, but it's still showing that compared with other ratio on the plate, where the carbs and the protein will take more space on your plate and will add more calories to your diet, this plate is still a lower calorie dense type of meal, just because half of the plate is vegetables. So with the plant-based diet, what I wanted to emphasize some findings from the National Kidney Foundation. A lot of people say, well, a lot of healthy foods are high in phosphorus. And as we talked last time, phosphorus can be a nutrient of concern for CKD patients. However, I mentioned last week that the naturally occurring phosphorus that's usually in foods like protein foods, but also plant-based foods like nuts and whole grains and legumes. So nuts, whole grains, and legumes are the main plant-based type of phosphorus foods. And I said that kind of phosphorus is not very absorbable. We absorb just about 40% of it. And the reason is, the reason for that is the phytates that are present in the phytates, or phytic acid, is found in plant seeds, and where it actually functions as the main storage of phosphorus. And those, again, would be nuts, legumes, and grains, but it's not very well absorbed, and actually will bind with other minerals like calcium and zinc, and kind of impair the absorption of those too. So definitely the phytates are kind of the ones that will are responsible for the poor absorption of phosphorus, natural phosphorus, in those plant-based foods. So the idea is, as I mentioned, when you have early stages, even in maybe a stage 4, that your phosphorus levels are pretty, are normal, I don't want people to necessarily take out those healthy foods out of their diet. So I always say, try to actually look at the phosphorus additives in your diet and the processed foods, that's a more absorbable form of it. So basically, when we eat those plant-based foods, even with other more animal-based phosphorus like dairy products and cheese and milk, that phosphorus because of the phytates is not well absorbed. And kind of moving forward, I want to show you the nutrition label reading. I'm going to have another slide on phosphorus and the nutrition label. But for now, I want to just kind of do a quick review of how to look and read, just glance a few seconds at the nutrition label and be able to determine is this a good product for me or not. So I always say, and you have here at the top, start here, number 1. And you want to make sure first, before even reading and glancing at any number on the back, make sure you understand what they tell you it's a serving size. And in this case, we have a cup. Again, that serving size does not mean that's what's recommended for you to eat. It's just what the manufacturer determined that or decided that a serving would be a cup. So then they list the numbers of different nutrients based on that serving. So the idea is that if you eat double that amount, you eat more than a cup at a meal, you need to multiply everything by 2. If you eat less, let's say you eat just half a cup, then you divide everything by 2. So that's very important even before you glance at the numbers. Then you want to check the calories, and depending on your goals, do you need to maintain weight? Do you need to gain or lose? This would be important information. Just as a rule of thumb, the calories that are 250 or more per serving. So in a cup, 250 calories, that tells me it's a more caloric dense food. If it's less than 250 per serving, it's a lower calorie dense type of food. Then we want to look at few nutrients. You know, the ones that are with yellow, they usually, the lower the better for those numbers. So we want to limit these nutrients. This pertains mainly to saturated fat and sodium. And then of course you want to look at trans fats and make sure this number is 0 here and not 3 grams. Because we want as less, if possible, 0 trans fats in our diet. Those seem to increase the risk of heart disease more than even saturated fat. But for the saturated fat and sodium, I ask people to look at the percentage better than grams or milligrams, because sometimes that's confusing and it's harder to remember what's my reference point. But with the percentage, the rule of thumb is that when the percentage is 5% or less, that translates into low in that particular nutrient. And even when the percentage is 20% or more, that translates into high in that nutrient. So we glance saturated fat 15%. It's not 5 or less, it's not 20 or more, but it's closer to 20. So it is higher in saturated fat that we would want. Then sodium, we look here, 20%. Okay, that's high in sodium. And then you don't even have to worry about the milligrams and know the standards for milligrams, what would be low, what would be high, but the percentage will tell you. And then so we want for those saturated fat and sodium as low as possible, 5 or less ideally, up to maximum 10. That would still be kind of okay-ish. And then the blue ones are more like healthy nutrients, like fiber. So the fiber here is 0%, but guess what? For fiber, we want 20% or more because that will translate into a high fiber product. And we want that, especially if we have diabetes and we need to control blood sugar, or even for high cholesterol or for weight management. So fiber would be a good thing. So I wanted to kind of share this with you first. And then I wanted to talk a little bit about sodium and nutrition labels. So 5% or less low sodium, 20% or more high. Of course, that 5% or less happens when sodium per serving would be 140 milligrams or less. So that's kind of the definition of low sodium. And then also people can look at, I always encourage my clients to not just look at the nutrition label, but also the ingredient list. And be able to see the ingredients that are listed that would actually mean sodium, like salt, sodium, soda, like baking soda will add some sodium to that particular food. Get familiar with those salt, sodium, soda. Then We have this, for example, a sodium nutrition label can have ingredients like potatoes and soybean and whey, salt, dry milk solids, garlic salt. So we already see the fourth ingredient is salt, the sixth is garlic salt, then the eighth is monosodium glutamate, MSG, which is still a sodium product. And then the 10th one is sodium citrate. And so then we had 4 ingredients that actually add sodium to that particular food. The ingredients are listed from the most abundant to the least. So for example, there might not be as much sodium citrate in this product, but it's quite a bit of salt. The salt is the 4th ingredient. Moving forward, I mean, this is kind of like, kind of missed that, but it was a highlight and the underline of the sodium food. So I have an example here. For example, this Argento sharp cheddar cheese slice. We look at the first at the serving size, 1 slice. Okay, saturated fat 20%. That tells me, okay, it's a high saturated fat product. Cheese usually is, unless it's low fat or reduced fat. And this tells me, okay, it's not a low fat type of cheese. It's a full fat cheese. And then sodium, okay, 6%, not as much. Cheese also, certain type of cheeses will have more sodium, just the process of making it, and the aging process will require more sodium, but this one actually it's not as much. So just high in saturated fat, maybe I'll look for a low fat, reduced fat type of option for this cheese, so I'm lowering the saturated fat. Then we have this frozen dinner, lasagna Italiano, and in this case, we could see that a cup of this particular product, and you could see that there are 5 servings per container. So think about a fifth of that particular frozen meal will give you about 20% saturated fat and will give you about 25% of sodium. So quite high in both. Definitely maybe not the best product. You think about how much, not just saturated fat, but sodium you would save if you would make that at home or a version of that at home. With the phosphorus, again, we don't have on the nutrition label the phosphorus added in milligrams or percentage, but you could, that's very helpful at this point to look at the ingredient list. And, you know, any ingredients that contain this phos, P-H-O-S-P-H in their names would be basically, will add phosphorus to your foods. And there are lots of them, and they're all listed here. Dicalcium phosphate, disodium phosphate, monocalcium phosphate, and on and on. I'm not going to read all of them, but those are all basically food additives. They're added for, you know, color enhancer or stabilizer. Like they serve different purposes. That's why they're added to food, but they're going to add extra phosphorus in your diet. And it's the higher absorbable one. The new nutrition label, you know, FDA kind of proved that it's supposed to start July 2021. I don't have a clear update on that if like all the products has changed to this, but our nutrition label is supposed to look a little bit different, to have the calories bigger, to kind of emphasize the serving side. It's bold, so people kind of look at it first because they miss that a lot. Saturated fat, again, 5%. Okay, this is low saturated fat product. Sodium, 167%, pretty low still. So this can be a good product. We don't know what it is, but we also look at fiber, 14%, not bad. And then we look at total sugars and includes 10% added sugar. So it's definitely a carbohydrate food, has about 37 grams of carbohydrates. So somebody that's diabetic with the CKD will have to be careful with, okay, will give me quite a bit of carbs, also has about 10 grams of added sugar, that's 20%. So the new label will actually differentiate between the old one is supposed to just say sugars, and they will basically clump together the natural sugar with added sugar. So you wouldn't know how much is added. It's all added unless you'd read the ingredient list and you would see sugar there. For example, a plain yogurt would still have 10 grams of sugar listed, but would be 0 added sugar. And then all that 10 grams would be naturally occurring sugar in milk, which is lactose. But on the old label, you would not know. You just see sugars 10 grams. And a lot of people would just like, how come it has so much sugar? It's just plain yogurt and doesn't even taste sweet. It's sour. But right now, with this new recommendation, they basically said you have to put total sugars, but then also tell us how much of that total sugar would be the added sugar. So it looks like this product still, out of 12 grams of total sugars, 10 of them are added. So they're not as many natural sugars as we would probably want. And the new label also added potassium here, actually, and they tell you exactly the milligrams and the percentage too. So for someone that needs to follow a low potassium diet, we said around 2,000 milligrams, somewhere between 2,000 to 3,000 a day. It's valuable to know that this 2/3 of a cup of this product would give you 235 milligrams of potassium. So I want to show you some examples of portion sizes, like what would be a portion size for an ounce of cheese, which is a good amount to eat a day, especially if you have high cholesterol or you're a higher risk of heart disease and you want to keep an eye on the saturated fat. And in an ounce of cheese, which would be, each of those 3 slices are an ounce and they look a little bit different. But in an ounce of cheese, you get about 7 grams of protein. You get somewhere between 180 to 480 milligrams of sodium, depending on the cheese. That's why when you buy cheese, it's important to look at the nutrition label. Potassium is not a good source of potassium, would be less than 50 milligrams, and phosphorus 120 to 50. So kind of, moderate to high, depending on the cheese. Because remember, I said the protein foods usually are high in phosphorus too. Moving forward, a portion size for 3 ounces of chicken, that deck of cards that we're talking about, or some people use their palm with no fingers. Some people have bigger hands than others, so that's why I like to use the deck of cards as a more kind of stable visual. Different nutrients in 3 ounces of chicken. So protein, 21 grams, quite a bit, right? Especially if you don't have a big budget, it's important to know. Sodium, 63 milligrams if cooked without salt. So naturally occurring sodium in chicken or meat is not that much. Potassium, 215, and phosphorus, 190. So those, are not super high, but pretty good sources of both potassium and phosphorus. Half a cup of cooked beans, that's about the size of your fist. Half a cup of cooked beans. Protein, 7 grams. Sodium, 0 milligrams if cooked without salt. So there's no naturally occurring sodium in beans. Potassium, quite a bit. And phosphorus, kind of medium. And again, there's no concern if you don't have elevated labs for potassium and phosphorus. If you have CKD kind of stable within normal labs, I don't want people to avoid eating beans because those are healthy foods and very beneficial. And then an ounce of nuts, which is usually 1/4 cup. And here you have an, I usually use the palm of your hand, or you could use household measuring cups for 1/4 cup, depending on the size of the nuts. They can be, for Brazil nuts, just 6 or 8 pieces. For almonds, you can have 20 to 24. So, sometimes just kind of scooping with a 1/4 cup can be more efficient to estimate. Protein, about 7 grams in 1/4 cup. Sodium, 0 to 3 milligrams if no salt added. And then potassium, 125 to 300, depending on the nut. Phosphorus, 100, 130. So there are lots of variations here too. And I wanted to kind of go into the meal planning and talk a little bit more about why it's important for people with CKD to do meal planning. We talk about definitely that the diet and diet changes can slow the progression of CKD. The obvious kind of reason is that, well, you can really have control over how you prepare that You can have variations to a recipe. You could switch ingredients. You could control how much sodium you add, of course. A lot of restaurant food, and unfortunately, it's high in sodium. And they use a lot of, like, for example, for soups, they use base, like a base, right, to cook a soup in bulk, which usually adds a lot of sodium to that soup to begin with, without even adding extra salt or other ingredients. So it's important to remember that usually restaurant cooked foods are higher in sodium, and you have more control when you're trying to make those at home. An important point, I have it here at the bottom, that planning meals ahead of time can make you actually more likely to make better choices. And I see that a lot because I always say, if you are prepared and if your meal is predictable, you know when you're going to eat, you know what you're going to eat, you're not going to think about food. I have this classic example, if like when people bring their lunch to work, well, when your work lunch break is, you know what you brought, you know how much you brought, you're not going to think about food until lunch comes and you're hungry and you're going to eat it. As opposed to if you don't bring your food with you, you're going to start getting hungry around 10 a.m. and then hungrier by 11. You're going to start changing your mind what you're going to buy and what you're going to eat. And the hungrier you get, actually, you'll notice that the desire to eat more and to eat more high fat, high carb kind of foods will happen, So it's like, it's a natural adaptation. Our brain will just crave more caloric dense foods when we get hungry and our blood sugar drops. So it's important to have this element of meal planning, meal predictability. You don't think too much about food. You are kind of made that decision and you're prepared for that meal, and likely you're going to stick with the better choice than actually allowing yourself to make a better choice at that time when maybe you're too hungry, maybe you're running out of time in your lunch break, or you just need to eat something. So it's very important to think of that. So some of the first steps to kind of do meal planning would be definitely very important, have a regular shopping day, at least once a week, I would say. Some people prefer to do more often, some maybe every other week, and some don't have any. So then that's a little bit, because you're running out of options. Whatever we bring in the house, we're going to end up eating, actually. You buy more foods that are processed and packaged, you're going to end up eating those. You buy more foods that are whole and fresh, you're going to eat those foods. So you need to shop regularly, especially when you're trying to change your diet and get more like a whole food, cooking from scratch type of approach. You need to have those foods on hand, because otherwise you're not going to make anything. So have a regular grocery shopping day. Definitely getting a list and thinking ahead of time before you go to the store would be important too. I like to, for example, give the advice of like, before going for that regular shopping day, look what you have in the house already and think about okay, I need to use this up. I haven't used it this week, but I need to make this. What can I make? And then figure out what are the ingredients you need for that dish. And this will help you actually with the meal planning for the next week. Be realistic about your time, pre-cooked versus raw foods versus leftovers. So that's something that, a lot of people that I know, they might say, well, I'm cooking a lot of chicken on a Sunday and then I'm making 3 meals out of that throughout the week, because sometimes I can shred it and put it in a kind of in a wrap, or I could shred it and put it on a salad, or I could, just eat it on the side. So kind of thinking that you could cook in bulk, especially a protein food, and then create a meal around that, thinking that, okay, I have my cooked protein, what else can I put around? And some people, when they do meal planning, they like to actually use the protein as okay, for protein, I'm going to do, I don't know, seafood, some chicken and eggs this week. And you kind of create meals around that. And then you need to add a healthy start, you need to add some vegetables, and then that will kind of guide the meal planning. Some people like to create the meals around their vegetables or starch, depending, but more common it's around that protein source that you decide to have for that particular week. Batch cooking is important, freezing the extras. I mean, yeah, when you cook, it's not going to take you way more time to make a bigger pot of food. Think about a soup, for example, than a smaller amount. So, you know, the time with the chopping and the cooking may still be about the same. So thinking that you're going to make more and maybe freeze some and have it in 2 weeks or so. So you kind of mix things up and you're not eating the same thing day after day after day for the entire week. I think that can be also helpful. Again, for people that need to, they're more advanced stages and they need to limit the phosphorus and potassium, kind of having those lists available on their fridge or in the kitchen, or just to get more familiar. In time, they learn what foods actually are high in phosphorus, potassium. They learn them by heart, and it's easier to do that. But for at the beginning, I would say have those lists available to as a resource would be helpful. Even when you don't need to restrict your diet too much of potassium and phosphorus. But as I said, you're more like a later stage, would still be good to be familiar with what foods are higher in potassium and phosphorus, just to be mindful and not in a day, not overdo, like eat only high potassium foods, you know, and cram all of them in one day or in one meal. So I think that awareness around what foods are higher, especially with potassium, would be good. And becoming an expert at reading those nutrition label. I gave you the tips, the rule of thumbs, 5% and 20. I think that's very important too. To always, when you buy a food that will have a nutrition label, just turn it on the back, look at it, look at the ingredients, look up, for those phosphates and sodium words, and just kind of know what's in that product. I always say if a product passes the nutrition test, then you could take it home and try it. And if it's going to pass the taste test too, so that's a winner, you know. But I won't buy it if it's not good for me, because the chances are you're going to take it home, you're going to like it, and now that's another food that you'll have to limit or avoid, and it just becomes kind of overwhelming and restrictive, and I won't even go there, basically. This is an example of a weekly plan, in the sense that you could use something like that if you like to write down. The planning a 7-day menu can be overwhelming. A lot of people do just like maybe 3 days, and then, for example, I put here Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and then they make enough leftovers that they fill in the other days with leftovers. So you kind of simplify that, and you don't feel like you're spending all your time in the kitchen and cooking every single meal. You could do that too if you like cooking, but I'm just trying to make things more efficient for the majority of people. And this is an example, you know, what you could have, and then you could alternate those, and you could fill in the blanks with basically some repetitive breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And I want to show you some pictures. I'm kind of approaching the end of my presentation. Breakfast ideas, some egg muffins. Depending, again, if you're diabetic or not, you can use almond flour to lower the carbohydrate content of that. I could put more vegetables in it. Avocado toast we have on the side with some egg whites or kind of chopped egg. Multigrain cereal, like an oatmeal with nuts and dry fruits, fruit on the side. So those are some examples. For lunch can be things like a soup with legumes and vegetables. So that's more kind of vegan, and use kind of the beans for the protein. I want to have a disclaimer. It's very hard to find foods online that look healthy. And even here, you know, this chicken, it's a salad with grilled chicken, which looks good, but looking at how much protein is likely not feeding very well its CKD budget for protein. So you might be able to do just 1 or 2 slices of chicken. And I would usually, what I recommend to do in a salad like that, chop it kind of more finely or shred it to the point that you spread pieces of chicken all over your salad. So when you mix it up with the dressing and the other ingredients, you kind of feel like you're going to have a bite of chicken with almost every bite, because the way it is right now, it's not, again, the ideal kind of picture. And then some pasta primavera with vegetables. And I think this is kind of some seafood. If it's not well imagined, that you can add 3 ounces of shrimp or scallops or things like that. And those are some whole wheat pita, ground beef, vegetables, and just kind of like some taco, like a taco version, but it has whole grain pita, can be a whole grain tortilla. And again, doesn't have to be ground beef, but I wanted to represent, because, red meat can be part of the diet. I think it's just a matter of like how often, how much in a week. I recommend no more than 12 ounces of red meat in a week for heart health. And some people choose to do even less than that. But not to say that you could never eat it. Of course, for people that are eating less red meat, they could have ground turkey or chicken. They can have shrimp in that pita pocket. So the options are quite a few. And then for dinner, you could have like a salmon and the salad. Again, the salmon should be the size of a deck of cards. Very hard to find pictures that will match that. It can be like a broccoli beef stir fry. It can be a turkey meatballs with herb pasta. Burrito bowl again, and actually we're gonna have more examples of a healthy bowl that Chef Duane tonight will actually show us how to make those healthy bowls part of our diet. And those are some snack ideas: celery with cream cheese, zucchini bread, tuna on a cucumber, walnuts. Those tend to be kind of lower in potassium type of walnuts, type of nuts. And again, fruits can be part of a healthy snack. The combination of fruit and nuts I like a lot. So a piece of fruit and a handful of nut seems to be satisfying. And I have some recipe resources that you're going to get with the slides. There are definitely a lot of kidney-friendly recipe sources online.
Yeah, so thank you, Elena. And hi, everybody. My name is Arianna Agajanians, and as mentioned earlier, I am the dietetic intern here at CHRC. And today I wanted to talk a bit about some popular diets that some of you may have heard of, and a little bit about the research that has been done about their risks and benefits in association with kidney health. And so hopefully this can answer some questions about whether these popular diets are recommended or not recommended for kidney health. And the first one I'm going to talk about is the ketogenic diet. And the ketogenic diet has been around for many years, which I'll talk a bit about, but it recently has gained a lot of popularity in the media and it's kind of resurfaced. And it is known to consist of a very low amount of carbohydrates with a high amount of fats and a moderate amount of proteins. So in a typical day, that would look like about 75% fats, 20% proteins, and only about 5% carbohydrates. And overall, because of the very low amount of carbohydrates, the diet can be very restrictive because a lot of our staple foods and very common foods, as you may know, contain carbohydrates. And this can include bread, fruit, vegetables, whole grains. And the diet was actually originally designed for children with epilepsy because it was thought to decrease the amount of seizures that they would have. But in more recent years, it's gained popularity in the media, more so for its potential effects on weight loss. And essentially the thought process behind this is that by cutting out your carbohydrates, which is typically our main energy source, the body eventually starts to break down our protein and fat instead to use for energy, which essentially helps us burn fat. But the research on this topic is still very limited, and we don't fully know the effects that it may have on our health and on certain conditions, such as chronic kidney disease. And I'll go a bit more into that a bit later, but some of you may also be familiar with similar diets that have been around, such as the paleo diet, South Beach, and Atkins diet. And these diets are all similar to the ketogenic diet in that they're all very low in carbohydrates. But these ones I just mentioned tend to be a bit higher in protein, while the ketogenic diet is meant to be higher in fat. But nowadays, the keto diet has been a bit more modified and tends to, in general, include a high amount of fats and proteins because of the very restricted carbohydrates, which, as mentioned throughout this course, can be a concern for kidney health, since we do want to be aware of our protein intake with CKD. And on the next slide, I'll go a bit more into the current research. And so this is some of the current research findings about the ketogenic diet effects on kidney health. And according to a study that was published by the Journal of the American Society of Nephrology on the effects of high protein diets on kidney health, the ketogenic diet was included as a high protein diet. And it was found that first, the high amount of fats that the diet includes is associated with an increased risk of albuminuria, which essentially is too much albumin protein that is found in your urine. And that is something that physicians look for as a sign of kidney disease. And the diet and the high amount of fat was also associated with a decline in GFR due to the increased amount of saturated fats in the diet because of the restricted carbs and the increased fats. Also, the study found that a potentially higher amount of protein intake was associated with accelerated progression of kidney disease due to the greater strain that the excess proteins put on the kidneys, which we've discussed. And then finally, it was concluded that the protective effects of many foods that become limited when you're on the ketogenic diet due to their higher carbohydrate amounts, such as our healthy fruits, vegetables, legumes, and some whole grains, which have a lot of healthy fibers in them, may be limited and would limit some potential health benefits that you could be getting for your kidneys if you were obtaining that in your diet in a more well-balanced diet. So overall, the study concluded that the patients with kidney disease, or for patients with kidney disease, the ketogenic diet may have more risks than benefits by declining your GFR and potentially causing higher levels of acids or proteins in your body. So it's currently not recommended. And then the next one I'm going to talk about is intermittent fasting. And some of you may have heard of intermittent fasting, as it's gained a lot of popularity in the media with weight loss. And the trend focuses on when to eat rather than what to eat. And there are many different ways to go about it. So there could be a 12-hour overnight fast, so not eating for 12 hours overnight, versus something that's more restrictive, like fasting for 2 days out of the week. And research does show that our bodies are evolved to go without food for long periods of time. So that's sort of where the logic of the diet comes from. And then on the next slide, I'll talk a bit more about its association with kidney health. And so according to a journal article about the effects of intermittent fasting on the progression of chronic kidney disease, a small population study found that there was a significant increase in GFR, which was seen when with CKD patients who were practicing intermittent fasting for 4 months or more, which was good, but it was also mentioned that previous and very similar studies on the topic had reported a decline in annual GFR. So there was just a lot of mixed evidence. And ultimately, this particular study concluded that the progression of CKD with intermittent fasting needs to be further studied before actually being recommended to patients. And that was a common theme that I saw in research. And another study that observed the effects of Ramadan fasting, which is about a 12 to 18-hour fast, found that patients with stage 3 CKD or higher following a Ramadan fast was associated with declining renal function. So a similar sort of result to the last study. And overall, I found that there's just a lot of mixed evidence. There's a lot of contradicting findings, and that it's a very new topic, that it's a lot more research needs to be done in order to come to a conclusive decision on whether or not it's beneficial or harmful for kidney health. So it's also important to consider that there are many variations of fasting, that it's just too broad to know the effects of every type of fast and all the different time periods at the moment. And so to conclude on this, it's important to take caution with fasting and to make sure to ask your healthcare providers for recommendation if it's something that you want to try, or if it's a religious practice of yours, to get the best recommendation. And the final topic I wanted to talk about was the plant-based diet. And there are many different variations of plant-based diets, such as vegan, vegetarian, or even Mediterranean, which Elena discussed, which still allows for meat consumption, but emphasizes plant-based food consumption. So there are different definitions of what plant-based can be, and it can be very individualized. And I know that Elena already shared some great information about using the diet, but I wanted to bring up some more research as vegan and vegetarian diets have become more popular. And so I'll review some of that on the next slide. So finally, according to a population study that was done on plant-based diets and kidney function, a higher adherence to an overall plant-based diet was associated with slower GFR decline. It was recommended by the National Kidney Foundation, who says that eating more plant-based foods in place of animal-based products may help prevent and slow the progression of CKD. And then also, according to the CDC, a low intake of fruits and vegetables is associated with a higher risk of kidney failure in US adults with or without CKD. So in general, it was recommended by the CDC that, or it was found by the CDC that eating less than 2 servings of fruits and vegetables per day was associated with 45% increased risk, while eating 4 to 6 servings per day was associated with only 14% increased risk, which was significantly lower with a higher consumption of plant-based foods in your diet. And so overall, the research highlights the benefits of this type of diet, sort of unlike the last 2 diets, which seemed to be more inconclusive and had more risks associated with them. So although it's important to pay close attention to portion sizes with some of our vitamins and minerals, as Elena previously mentioned, such as your potassium and phosphorus, a lot of the current research highlights the benefits of a more plant-based diet on kidney health. So that is currently a good recommendation. Yeah, that's all from me. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. All right, so I'm going to kind of follow up with all that great information you were just given on how do we actually use this in the kitchen. And one idea I thought about was, let's talk about grain bowls and how we can use them to do a meal plan and be creative and help you stay on whatever medical nutritional advice your team recommends for you. Okay, so we're going to go to the next slide. And what I first want to tell you is a little bit about my journey. I'm actually a CKD patient. I was diagnosed at the beginning of 2001 with minimal change disease. And I went to a nephrologist who never ever talked to me about diet. And over the first 6 months of my treatment, as you can see from my top driver's license there, I gained about 75 more pounds than what I am today. And my creatinine level kept rising. Actually, at its worst, it was 4.99, and I was spilling a lot of protein. So I had a consult with 2 other nephrologists, and one of them actually suggested that I should change my diet and go to a more plant-based diet, like what the National Kidney Foundation recommends, And not being a very good patient, I didn't listen to that doctor for about another year, when a dietitian friend of mine who came into my office one day and said, I want to do a challenge. I want you to go off of animal protein just for 90 days and let's see what happens. So I had been sick for a year and a half. I was ready for a change. So I said, okay, let's do this. And my friend said, I want you to start Monday morning. Take the weekend and eat what you want. Well, I had selective hearing as a patient, and I heard this dietitian say, eat as much as you wanted. So I was a really bad patient that weekend. And it was Friday night, a kidney patient. I was trying to work. I was exhausted. I come home. I had 2 small children at the time, and they said, Dad, we want pizza for dinner. And I said, great. I don't have to cook. I'll take care of it. So a family of 4 with 2 small kids, I ordered 4 large pepperoni pizzas with extra cheese because I heard the dietitian say I could do that. Well, needless to say, my first Friday night weekend of eat what I want, about 2 o'clock in the morning, I was really, really sick. I thought I came down with the flu. I couldn't eat the whole rest of the weekend. And then about Sunday afternoon, I realized it was the pizza that did this to me. So I'm a pretty big advocate that food has a huge impact on us as kidney patients. So that next Monday morning, I changed my diet. It was much harder than I thought. I went into this as an egotistical chef. I've been around food all my life. So I thought this would be easy, but changing, a 40-year eating pattern is not easy. It took a lot of energy at first, but what was so amazing was within 2 weeks of changing my diet, I started feeling better. I couldn't believe it. And because I started feeling better, I was very, very motivated to stay on a plant-based diet, which works for me. I realize it's very individual to whatever each patient needs for their nutritional needs. But for me, the plant-based diet really worked. And then over about a 2.5-year period, I was actually able to wean off of all my medication with my doctor's supervision, and I put my kidney disease in complete remission. So today, my creatinine level is 0.8, my microalbumin is 14 milligrams, and my GFR is at 98. So that's why I'm such an advocate about diet being associated for kidney patients. And I really appreciate all the information we received today, because I wished I had had that when I was first diagnosed with kidney disease. So thank you for that. So that's my journey. Since I feel better, and I'm a culinary arts instructor, I just thought fate put me here for a reason. So my mantra is I try to help patients one recipe at a time. So that's why I'm here today. So the next slide, we're going to talk about grain bowls and how can we utilize those to stay on a healthy meal plan. Next slide. So one thing you need to know about grain bowls is they have 5 basic components. There's a whole grain, a protein, your fresh vegetables, then we have seeds or nuts, and then we have some kind of dressing or sauce over that. So if you kind of keep this formula of there's 5 things that go in a grain bowl, and then you can be really creative based on what nutritional guidelines you've been given. So let's talk about whole grains. We were using one example of brown rice. You can use quinoa, farro. There's a variety of different grains that you can use for a grain bowl. That's one of the reasons I like them. The other thing is you can cook off these grains, put them on a baking sheet and stick them in the freezer so they freeze, and then just bag them up and put them in baggies. So you already have them cooked off and they're frozen in your freezer. So it's very easy to assemble a grain bowl by doing that. They don't take much time. Your protein source can be chicken, fish. You can shred the chicken, chop the chicken. You can do fish, shrimp. If you're on a plant-based, you can do tofu that's been drained. Beans or lentils. So there's a lot of variety here with the proteins that you can use. Your fresh vegetables, once again, follow whatever your nutritional guidelines are. If you're watching potassium or phosphorus, then you have to work with those vegetables that are low in those minerals. But this is a great way of controlling that because you know how much you're putting onto your bowl. And then I like a little crunch. I didn't know until I changed my diet. I really like texture in my diet, like most people. So I always appreciate having something chewy in there. So that's why I like the seeds or nuts. Chia seeds are a great source of protein and omega-3. There's hemp seeds, pumpkin seeds, peanuts. You can chop peanuts up, chop walnuts, cashews, sesame seeds. And once again, it's really easy to control the portion size of that. And then your dressing or your sauce, based on whatever kind of theme you want, and we're going to show you a couple, I'm going to talk about some different ones here, but you can make your own dressing or your own sauce, so you can really control and limit the amount of sodium you're putting on your grain bowl. All right, so let's go to the next slide. So we were shown kind of this divide your plate into a half and a quarter and a quarter. I wanted to come back to this again, because if you think about this, when you put your grain bowl together, if you're doing just vegetables, you can put where it says vegetables and fruits, you can take up half of that grain bowl and do all of your vegetables there. Your grains can be a quarter portion, you know how it's divided. If you're a patient with diabetes, you can limit that. You don't have to have it at a quarter. You can make that smaller. And then Elena did a great job of talking to us about the size of our protein that we should be consuming. So it's real easy for you then to fit that into a quarter or less of your grain bowl. So visually, I really like this because you can just kind of look at a bowl when you assemble your ingredients and think, divide it into 4 quadrants, and then start portioning out accordingly, okay? All right, so the next slide is gonna show us, and then the next slide, one more, we're gonna talk about a Southwest grain bowl. And what goes into a Southwest grain bowl? Well, black beans, if you're using canned black beans, I'm a real advocate of buying low sodium canned beans, but also rinse them really well and let them drain. It's another way of removing more sodium from them. We're going to use some cooked brown rice. We're going to have some cooked quinoa. Quinoa is a great grain because it also has a little bit of protein in it as well. And then we're going to chop up some celery, red and green peppers, some green onions. We're going to have some fresh cilantro. And then I'm also going to show you in the cooking video, how do you make a Southwest dressing to go over your grain bowl. So now we're going to show you the actual cooking video. So here's the cooking part of today's presentation.
All right, so we're going to start by using the balsamic vinaigrette dressing recipe that's on the Puget Sound Kidney Center's website. And we're going to actually flavor that with a Southwest flavor to use that as our dressing on our Southwest grain bowl. So what I'm going to start by is adding my oil, balsamic vinegar, Dijon mustard, and then I'm going to add, on the website they have a Southwest taco seasoning that's salt-free, so I'm actually adding a teaspoon of that. And I'm adding a half a teaspoon of smoked paprika and a half teaspoon of regular paprika. And then you just whisk that all together. You'll see it's a very nice dark sauce. And this is what we're going to use as our dressing over our Southwest grain bowl. Are you ready? Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to put together our Southwest grain bowl, and we're going to follow the nutrition plate that is on that you can get from the Puget Sound Kidney Center. And it's basically you take your plate and you divide it into 4. And so 1/4 would be the whole grains, 1/4 would be your protein, and then the entire other half is made up of vegetables and fruit. So if you kind of think about having your bowl divided into 4, that's how we're going to put this together. So what I'm going to start with the whole grains, and I have some quinoa that I've just cooked off in some water. So I'm going to add a little bit of quinoa. I have some brown rice. So there's my whole grains. I'm also going to add some black beans as a great protein source. Okay. And then on my vegetable side, I have some corn. And then I have some diced up green red peppers. Green peppers, red peppers. I have some chopped up celery. I have a little bit of chopped up green onions. I'm just going to sprinkle those all over the entire grain bowl. And then with my grain bowls, I always try to have some seeds. So this is some hemp seeds. I'm going to sprinkle that over the top. It adds a little bit of flavor, texture. It's also a great protein source. And then I like cilantro, so I'm going to just add some fresh chopped up cilantro on top for color and flavor. And what's really nice about grain bowls is you can actually make them ahead of time. So I know when I was super sick with kidney disease, I had my days where I didn't have a lot of energy. So the one day a week that if I was rested up, I could actually make grain bowls, put them in the refrigerator and have them ready to go later in the week when I was going to have my days when I wasn't feeling so well. So I love grain bowls. It's also a great way of packing your lunch if you're working. So you can make these ahead of time, put them in the fridge, and then all you have to do when you're ready to serve them or eat them is add your Southwest dressing. And I just sprinkle that, drizzle that on over the top. And there's my really flavorful and delicious lunch or dinner. So grain bowls are a great way to use what your dietitians recommend you eat. So always kind of think about some creative ways of following what your dietitian has recommended for you.
Now we're all hungry, Duane.
Okay. So that was our Southwest grain bowl. There's some other versions you can do with that. The Buddha bowl is an Asian flavor for people who like, and I love Asian cuisine as well. So the nice thing about a Buddha bowl that has Asian flavor is you can make them without soy sauce and lower that sodium. I like to use a lot of fresh ginger. I use sesame oil because it's very, very flavorful, adds a lot of flavor, but doesn't always have to add a lot of fat. And then I've also been working with coconut aminos, which is a lower sodium version that's similar to soy sauce. But I do recommend you need to check with your dietitian or your medical team, because I'm not sure about the potassium and phosphorus levels of coconut aminos. But that's a great way of getting that Asian flavor. You can also do a Mediterranean bowl if you like Mediterranean, which I love that as well. It's a little more flavorful with garlic, but you can do sliced cucumbers. You can do your grains. You can do if you're using that cooked chicken. This is a great way of utilizing some of that cooked chicken from a couple of days ago. So Mediterranean is another great way. Also just do a grain bowl with grilled vegetables, especially as we're coming to the end of summer and we're getting all these fresh vegetables hitting us in the farmer's market and our stores. This is a great time to grill vegetables on the barbecue, and you can grill them up on the weekend and have them in their fridge all week. So it's a great way of making that grain bowl. And then the other thing I want people to think about too is this is just a great way of using up leftovers. You have those little bits of things in the fridge, and I'm a chef. We don't like to waste food. So how can we utilize this and make it fresh and exciting? So grain bowls are a wonderful way of doing that as well. Okay. So be creative. That's my big thing I want you to go away from this is be creative, use grain bowls as a way of your meal plan. Because with the same ingredients, you just have to make a different sauce and it gives it a whole different flavor. So I have to tell you, grain bowls were a great success for me, keeping me on my diet. And like Elena said, you really, if you plan your week out with a meal plan, you will follow the guidelines that you were given. It's so much easier because when we have a plan, we tend to stick to it and we know we're actually going to be healthier and for myself, I actually feel better when I follow my medical team's recommendations. So I'm real lucky in that respect. Okay. So I think we're going to open this up for questions.
I have a question concerning dressing. I like to use yogurt sometimes to make a dressing with just a few drops of oil and lemon juice, some garlic, and more or less that's enough. I can put maybe some spice on the top. And like that, I avoid the fat of the oil, etc. I have a little bit of oil, but mostly yogurt, plain yogurt, and it's good. That's what I want to say.
Thank you for sharing that.
Huh?
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. That's a wonderful idea. That's kind of like a tzatziki, type of sauce with.
You can put tahini inside also. You can do that. You can put also mayonnaise if you love mayonnaise. I don't. But if you love mayonnaise, you put a little bit of mayonnaise and more yogurt and things like that. And you can be happy with your mayonnaise dressing yogurt.
Yeah, kind of more like, especially for people with creamy, they prefer more creamy dressings. I think probably low fat, non-fat, regular yogurt, not as much the Greek because that has higher protein. And again, if you need to limit the protein, you don't want to add extra protein with your dressing, but like a regular kind of European style yogurt that you could put, garlic, chopped cucumber.
Yeah.
You could put herbs like dill or parsley or what you like. I mean, you can customize it, but it's really so good.
Basil also, summertime, you can use fresh basil.
Yeah.
And it's
very refreshing, especially for the summer.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing.
I have a question here for Chef Duane. What advice would you give your younger, just diagnosed self? What do you do about a sweet tooth and still make relatively healthy choices?
So you were just diagnosed, I just want to repeat the question. So you're just diagnosed with kidney disease, and what changes you would recommend? Is that the question?
What kind of choices would you recommend for someone with a really bad sweet tooth?
Well, first of all, kidney disease is so individualized. I always say, talk to your medical team first. And I wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for the knowledge of dietitians. So I just admire dietitians and their science of what they know about food. Once I know what you can eat, then I kind of play a game with it. If you think about our board games, we have rules that we have to follow to play the game correctly. That's how I approach the diet. What are the rules I have to live by? And then I start figuring out, how can I make this taste good? Because if it tastes good, I will follow the diet. I think there's a 5-year-old inside of each of us. And the only way that 5-year-old's going to behave is if we give it good food. So, and I've become a better cook because of my kidney disease. It's very easy for people to add salt, to add flavor. Once you take that step out, then you have to do something else. So for me, it was make sure I cooked correctly. The cooking technique adds flavor. I started playing and experimenting with spices and herbs. And just the Southwest spices that go into the dressing you saw, that originated when I looked at a taco seasoning packet in the back. We learned how to read labels today. So I was reading the spices in that seasoning pack, and of course, salt was the very first ingredient. So I looked at their list of spices and said, I can make this. And I started literally pouring spices into a little dish, mixing them up and tasting them. And then I got it to a flavor that I liked. So remember, it's a journey. I think that all patients have to understand this. We have a tendency to think of food as what we ate last and then forget about it. And with kidney disease, it's this constant, we're constantly adding fuel to our body, but we may be also adding things to our body we shouldn't. So you've got to think about this as a journey, and it can be an enjoyable journey. That's what I want patients to know. We just have to figure out how to put flavor into it and start with one change and build from that. That's what I did. I started with taking out sodium, and then I worked on animal protein and just kept progressing from there. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, and I want to add, because I know that the question was also about the sweet tooth, and I want to add, like with any changes that Chef Duane talked about, like, yeah, it is a journey, and sugar intake, especially if you're diabetic with chronic kidney disease, definitely it's something that you need to watch, but it can be more a progressive approach, and it's all about changing that mind frame around sugar. I mean, I think the majority of people like sweet taste and like sweets, and that's nothing that you should deny or say, I'm not going to like it anymore, or I'm going to change this diet and I'm never going to touch anything sweet. It's not about that. It's always about understanding where you are right now. And let's say if you're a person that eats sweets every day, multiple times a day, like what would be actually next step that's realistic? Maybe limiting to once a day a dessert, right? As opposed to multiple times a day. And then moving forward and weaning off sugar to maybe a couple of times a week as a treat and make it more special. I think my advice with somebody with a sweet tooth is to understand that sugar actually feeds the dopamine loop in our brain. So the more we have, the more we want to have it. And it creates this addictive cycle that feeds itself. So the best way to do about it is to interrupt that cycle. That means you're not giving your brain that kind of opportunity to crave for more sugar. And I work with a lot of people that wean themselves off sugar, and it might be a little bit harder the first week, the first month, but then everybody, what they report back, they say, I don't crave it anymore. I don't care as much about it anymore. But when you are in a sweet tooth kind of cycle and you eat it every day, multiple times a day, it's never going to end unless you make it end to the point that, okay, I'm just going to do it less often. And then you get to the point that when it's not that often, it doesn't feed that cycle. And then you could be happy and enjoy it, but you can enjoy it in moderation. For a lot of people, this approach works. And just, again, changing your mind around it, understanding that this is kind of an addiction cycle. And sugar, it's been shown that can kind of light up the same parts of our brain that more addictive substances like tobacco and drugs and alcohol will light up. So it has this addictive effect on our brain chemistry for sure.
And I have to say, it can be done. My office is right next to a bakery here on campus. So I'm located in the worst place possible, and I allow myself like one cookie a week.
Joel asks, Can you be more specific about what dietary changes brought down your creatinine?
Well, for my case, my kidneys don't do well with animal protein. I first lowered my sodium intake and I still wasn't doing much better. But when I took as much animal protein out of my diet as possible, that's when I started to see an improvement in my kidney function. And you have to remember, though, this was 20 years ago and there wasn't all the research on plant-based diets that there is today. So it shocked my doctor. She wasn't expecting the same results that I was able to accomplish. And she said she had never had a patient that kind of was so assertive about going to a plant-based diet like I was. So for me, what I have to watch is how much animal protein I eat. Now, I'm a chef, I work in restaurants, I know meat tastes good. So I understand that. You know, the joke in my office is, well, let's give Chef Duane a piece of bacon. Okay, I mean, I know it tastes good. That's why people eat it. But if you can limit that, your body is going to respond in a positive way. And that's what mine did. So I'm a total advocate for plant-based diets, but that's just me and my journey. You have to talk to your medical team what's recommended for you.
I have a question concerning buying beef. I'm not a beef eater a lot. I mean, I eat beef sometimes. And I'm a little bit discouraged when I go to the market to look at the price for a steak or, you know, a normal piece like that I will not eat because I live alone. And I don't know what to choose. I don't buy that because I will not finish it, so I lose something. I'm afraid to buy a ground meat already prepared because of the bacteria, etc. Maybe in this country you are not, I don't know how to explain it. In Europe, 30 years ago, we had a big problem with ground meat, and governments decided to ask the public to go to the butcher and ask the butcher to ground the meat in front of you. And that's a law. Okay, so now I'm here and I cannot ask the butcher because I don't know where is the butcher. So I am a little bit always sort of frustrated or worried to buy beef, and I don't know how you do it.
Well, one thing is the leaner cuts of meat are going to be healthier for you. There's going to be less fat.
Yeah.
They are going to be a little more expensive. So there's always, that helps with keeping the portion size small. And for ground beef, I'm always an advocate of a low fat ground beef. And if you go to a reputable butcher shop or grocery store, you shouldn't have a problem with ground beef in today's world.
No, okay.
And so also if you cook it to, you know, kind of 100, I think it's 165 for beef. So kind of cook it better, like don't need it rare as much.
Okay. And for example, if I buy ground beef, I use half of it tonight and the other half tomorrow. I leave it in a refrigerator. Should I cook the whole thing at once, or should I cook only half tonight and the other half tomorrow?
Well, check the expiration date. Most of the time, if the expiration date's a couple days down the road in the future, then you can leave it in your fridge for another 24 hours. I also like to just cook it all at once and dirty one pan once because I don't like to do dishes. So I would cook it at once and just reheat it on day 2.
Okay, maybe I will do that. It's easier. Okay, thank you.
I can see that Rachel commented that I found that using lemon and lime are not too much, are also a way to season Buddha and rice bowls. It also adds zest to soups. And it's true, with great flavors using lemon and lime.
Thank you for that suggestion. Also, if you happen to buy canned like tuna or salmon, lemon juice is a great way of rinsing the canned fish, and it adds flavor, it brightens it up, and it also helps get rid of some of that salt.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much.